Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Leading Change. My name is Emma, and I have got Meg with me today, and we're going to be talking about digital transformation for a purpose, not just for the sake of technology. But before I get to all the questions that I've got for you, Meg, can you give everybody a real quick introduction?
Absolutely. Emma, thanks for having me. I'm Meg Duty, a Senior Vice President at Puritan Life, which is an all-cloud annuity carrier, and Canvas Annuity, which is a wholly online annuity distribution agency.
Well, I'm excited to have you specifically for you to showcase some of the work that you guys did to get to that point where you can be an all cloud company. So I teased this idea, and I just want to open the conversation with getting your opinion on kind of like, what does digital transformation for a purpose mean, and what does that look like?
I love that question because digital transformation is such a hot topic, right? Especially over the past 5 years in insurance. And I've seen a lot of, being a total tech nerd, I've seen a lot of tech for tech's sake, which while that's exciting and easy to get caught up in, it's just not the way that we approach things at Puritan Life and Canvas Annuity. And so for us, digital transformation or really any innovation for a purpose, I was trying to boil this down, like thinking about getting ready to talk to you, like what is my most straightforward answer? And I boiled it down to one very important thing, which is our tech roadmap and our organizational strategy are the same thing. So I get asked a lot, like, how do you align your tech roadmap with your org strategy? And I kind of have a blank stare for a second with that question where I think, like, how do we align that? Well, we don't. It literally is the same thing. And we have to do a lot of background work to be able to make that strategy, and roadmap at the same time. So at Puritan Life and Canvas Annuity, we have two senior vice presidents, myself and Deirdre Woodruff, who are ultimately responsible for strategy. And so when we come to the table to talk to each other, one of the main things I do from a tech perspective is I organize our tech shop so that our what I call ops tech or chore tech, right? The things that keep the lights on are handled differently and resourced differently than our strategic tech. And those are going to be our differentiators, which is for us, sales and customer service, right? And so when we're coming to the table to make this strategy, how are we going to push the company forward? How are we going to move the needle? We're talking strictly on the strat side of the house. And we know that the operational side of the house from a tech perspective will run, like we'll keep the lights on, but I'm kind of unpopular when I say this, but that's not a strategy. It just has to be done, right? So that piece I take care of. I do it primarily through partnerships. So we have a managed services partner that handles our network and our end user support. We have TPAs or third party administrators that are in charge of our admin systems or our core. And so once we come to this strategy making table, like I said, that piece is taken care of and put away and not part of the conversation where we talk about how tech and organizational strategy can meet, right? The other major piece for that is from an educational perspective, which Emma, you'll be excited about. The teacher in you is going to get like real activated right now. But Deirdre knows, like she can tell you what an API is. I can tell you what the top three objections that our agents get to, product sales are. And so there's enough knowledge on both sides of the fence so that when we come to our strategy, conversation and we're mapping out what our goals are for the year and beyond, there's enough knowledge on both sides to blend that together really nicely into the same approach, which is super critical for us as well.
I love not only like the digital literacy side, but maybe we just coined a whole other piece like on the business or business literacy side, because
Yeah.
I think ultimately tech people that don't understand insurance is like one of the number one complaints that I hear about, like
Mhm.
whether it be insurance, like insure techs or technical resources within insurance companies, having that disconnect on the business side. But then to your point, that disconnect on the actual like digital literacy side, it's so important for people to be speaking the same language. So I love that you guys have identified that and recognized that it's a strength and something that you need to continue to lean into.
Yeah. And, I haven't always been in insurance, right? So I came to this industry like maybe 6 years ago now. And so I feel like I'm very cognizant of the fact that there's a lot of learning for me to do coming from outside the industry. And I think that has been handed down nicely through the team that I've built, because I've been on this like quest for insurance knowledge in order to properly, be able to recommend, the right technology, be able to spot the trends that are relevant. I don't feel like I know what I'm doing in those spaces without knowing what I'm doing in insurance first.
Well, and you're demonstrating to your team that like that knowledge is important and that continuous learning is important. So naturally they're going to be more apt towards doing that as well, which is, you're leading by example.
Yeah, totally.
So I'm going to use like air quotes when I say technical in this question, because I don't mean technical in terms of like the technology that you're using, but how are you going about technically accomplishing this from like a team perspective and like a viewpoint of how you are investing in technology, not just for the sake of the shiny tools?
Yeah. So I think what you're asking is like, how are you actually doing this?
Yes.
Which is my favorite thing to share, because it's my favorite thing to hear, right? When I hear somebody interviewed, or I'm at a conference and hear somebody speaking, the thing I want to hear is like, what did you do? And even if it's not exactly the same as what I would do, I feel like I get the most amount of takeaway from just knowing specifically, how does that work? And so for us at Puritan Life, there's a couple of factors that are really important. One of them I mentioned at the beginning, Puritan Life is an all cloud shop. We actually changed hands in 2016 and then again in 2019 from an ownership perspective. And as we went through those different acquisitions, I just took the opportunity to like jettison all the legacy tech I could and roll us into the cloud as quickly as possible, which at the time made us compact and easily transportable from an acquisition perspective. But now, that we found our permanent home, if you will, from an ownership perspective, and we're focusing more on pushing the company forward for the last, 5+ years. That same cloud infrastructure gives us, scalability, flexibility, interoperability. And I just use 3 like really buzzy words, which let me solidify them for you a little bit. Like scalability, we can spin up a server in 20 minutes. Interoperability, like we use the Microsoft Azure cloud that connects to almost everything really easily. And flexibility, especially from a cost perspective, like we have an OpEx model of IT, and our IT costs, including salaries, are less than 1% of our top line revenue. And so that gives us a lot to play with from a tooling perspective. And that cloud infrastructure is so important. It underlies everything else we do, like I said, from a scalable, flexible, interoperable cost perspective, as well as speed, right? With all those things. And another thing, I touched on it before, but it's incredibly important to us, so I'll dig into it a little deeper, are our partnerships, right? So we have TPAs that handle our back office work, which is customer service, billing, new business, everything on that side of the fence. I have vendors like Microsoft that handle our infrastructure. And then I have, partners like our managed services company who does like network and end user support. And so we at headquarters have 25 people, but we have a really outsized impact. Like, 2018, I think we did 52 million in business. We'll do more than 400 million this year. And so we've been able to have a really high level of growth and that outsized impact with a small amount of resources at headquarters, because we have those really good partnerships. Now, just having partners isn't enough, right? You have to have partners that are a good fit for you, with services that are actually value added and well priced. But we've learned along the way that you also have to be able to be a good partner, which for us looks like leading our partners in directions that maybe they didn't want to go, but also being like responsive and easy to work with. So I'm going to link that back to the cloud platform, especially from a tech perspective. It's easy to partner with us because we have such flexible infrastructure, right? So critical partnerships, well designed, but also ones that are a good fit, and then being a good partner ourselves. And then from actually, I'll pause there. There's one more piece, but it's your next question. So I'll hold the last one.
I was waiting for the segue because it felt like it was coming.
Yeah, it's all related. But really, like, how do you do this? How do you make it happen? It comes down to that really flexible infrastructure and then very carefully curated and well-managed partnerships.
Well, and so the last piece that I do want to talk about is the cultural piece. And I would say we even teased this in the first portion when you were talking about just how you lead and like your approach to learning and building knowledge where you might have gaps. But to your point, the last piece of this has to be the cultural shift. So how do you manage and lead that type of culture shift to get everybody moving in the same direction?
Absolutely. So I'll say our number one rule is we do what makes sense when it makes sense. And again, I don't come from the insurance industry. I actually came from a group of companies that acquired Puritan Life at one point as an investment holding, and then, ended up coming over to manage that investment and then, and moving forward with that into the insurance industry. And although our other senior vice president has been in insurance like her whole life, it's kind of a family business for her. My story is similar to that of a lot of our other employees at Puritan Life. And so I feel like we have, from our previous companies and our other industries, like, for example, a lot of our team came out of the retail car space from a team that worked with Carvana, which was, the first online car sales. They had those really big vending machines, were kind of flashy back in the day. And so we have a mindset that's really nimble, that doesn't hang on to like a long tradition of a certain way of doing things. We just do what makes sense when it makes sense. And what we've learned to do as we've grown the team, because we've doubled in size, since 2015, is to ask questions to hire for that specific mindset as well. We do interviews like a speed dating round. So if you come in to interview for Puritan Life, you're going to meet with probably about half the staff by the time you're done. Sets of 2, we get about 10 minutes. And I always tell the interviewee, like, we may ask you a lot of the same questions, but it gives you a chance to perfect your spiel and also take the point of view that you're in here interviewing us as well. And it makes a really dynamic conversation. And we end up finding candidates that are going to like perpetuate the culture that we've built by digging in that way from an interview perspective. We really are good. Same thing with like doing what makes sense when it makes sense, at removing barriers and then taking action. So you will very rarely see something just kind of languish at Puritan Life. We may make the wrong decision and have to regroup on that, which we're also good at. But we are, fast decision makers. We're really good at spotting barriers and removing those. And then, like I said, we're super action oriented. And I like to say my number one superpower, which I see echoed throughout the organization, is crowdsourcing, right? So I'm like, I don't know all the information. I don't have all the ideas, but my superpower is just kind of asking and soliciting that out of everybody that we have, both internally and our external partners, to get, new ideas for innovation or understand best practices or figure out, like I said, at a conference, I love to hear how somebody else did something. Just pulling in all of that information and synthesizing it is one of, like I said, my superpowers. And then I also see that echoed throughout the organization as well.
I love the idea that you guys hire for the right cultural fit to be able to join in on what you guys have got going on. Because I think that that's such an important thing. There's so many things that you can train somebody on. Like you were talking about, you can learn insurance. You can even learn technology. I did.
Yeah.
But you have to be the right cultural fit to have the right mindset, because not everybody's going to enjoy working in that type of environment. So I think that that's a really important part of that recipe that you guys have put together, is really helping start it from the very beginning of somebody's career journey with your team.
Yeah, it really is important to us. And it's interesting when you build an organization, we're still small, but we were even smaller 5 years ago. And when you build a small team, outwards. It's interesting how those habits and things that you thought were, somewhat important in the beginning, once you start to see them echo throughout your growing team, you understand just how critical they really are. And so I'm thankful for that chance to have started with a smaller group. It was like a dozen people when we first started, and being able to kind of greenfield those cultural values and do it right, and then make sure that they continue to have a hold as we're expanding the team as well. And I want to add something too, because what I was just talking about were like, I paused because I had said a lot of words at once, but what I was talking about were like a lot of soft skills and how, from a culture perspective, the softer side of things works, but also and this is just as ingrained in our culture as the soft skills are. We have a very purposeful approach to execution, right? So I'm a PMP. I have a lot of training on the project management side of the house, and we have processes where we're mapping out our strategic plan. We're putting our projects underneath that. We know how to execute a project on time, on budget. And it's interesting because when I first started managing projects way back in the like auto retail space, I was told when I put my project estimates for time and budget in, plus or minus 50% is okay on timeline, and plus or minus 15% is okay on budget. And I thought, that is the worst thing I've ever heard. If I cannot estimate something with any degree of accuracy, like, why am I even creating this planning document, right? And so I have brought projects in like almost 100% on time, on budget throughout my career. And so that's something that I brought to Puritan Life, and we've really baked it into the way that we do things, because it's easy to be, not easy, but it's easier to be successful once, but to make that a repeatable process, like to build a machine that I like to call it opportunity agnostic, right? So we can look and say, oh, this is a really exciting new product, or we have a new partner that we are really wanting to interest in us, or just like Canvas Annuity is an entirely new online platform. It doesn't really matter what the opportunity is that we're pursuing. We have this machine that works really well to get things from planning to execution.
I love that. And I love the unique, for anybody that hasn't watched it, go back and watch the live that I did with Meg and a couple of other folks last week. Well, I mean, when this posts, it'll be different than last week, but you should check out that to learn a little bit more about like what that windy road to get Meg to the point where she's this well-rounded.
That's true. I should say I haven't always been in tech, just like I haven't always been in insurance. So yeah, it's interesting how, like we said in the live, how all of those varied backgrounds add value to the thing I'm doing now, even though they're not directly related to it.
Yeah. Well, we could probably keep going because there is already a number of things that I could pull out to continue the conversation. But I want to stop here and thank you, Meg, for joining me. And for everybody who's watching, if you're not already, make sure that you follow Meg. She gives a lot of really practical advice on all of this kind of stuff and shares the results that your team is seeing. And certainly reach out to either one of us if you've got any questions. But thank you, Meg, and thank you everybody for watching, and have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Leading Change. If you liked what you saw, be sure to subscribe and come back weekly for more expert interviews on digital transformation, change management, and emerging technologies.